It was late at night, around 11:47 p.m. on October 12, 2025. At Buckingham Palace, every major British news outlet flashed the same headline across their screens. Emergency at Buckingham Palace. Something was terribly wrong. Reports began to circulate that King Charles III had been rushed to his private medical quarters inside the palace. Within minutes, the Royal Communications Office released a brief, carefully worded statement. His Majesty is under medical supervision. No further details, no photos, just silence. But outside the palace gates, whispers grew louder. One eyewitness told the Telegraph, "I've never seen an ambulance move that fast through the palace gates. It was chaos, guards were shouting, doors slamming, something serious happened." Social media exploded with speculation. Some claimed the king had collapsed in his study after reading a classified government report late into the night. Others believed it was something far more personal. Inside the palace, emotions ran high. Through tears, Queen Camilla was overheard saying softly, "No, he just needs to rest. Charles never listens to his doctors." A senior aide, his voice heavy, added, "His Majesty worked until the very last moment." And yet, the most unsettling part wasn't the king's sudden illness. It was the silence that followed. The palace had gone completely quiet, and the world was left asking the same question. What really happened inside Buckingham Palace that night? Buckingham Palace, 11:47 p.m. The corridors that were usually filled with the quiet rhythm of the night suddenly erupted into chaos. The red lights of the internal medical alarm system flashed through the hallways, something that had never happened in decades. Within seconds, guards rushed toward the private royal study. There, on the polished oak floor, King Charles III was lying motionless, one hand still clutching a folder of documents. The signature line on the final page remained blank. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly, echoing through the silence that followed his fall. "Call Dr. Latham, now!" one of the aides shouted. Dr. Michael Latham, the king's personal physician for more than 15 years, arrived exactly 4 minutes later. His face was pale, his movements swift and precise. He kneeled beside the king, checked for a pulse, then ordered oxygen support to be brought in. "He's breathing, but it's faint," he said sharply. "Get everyone out of the room except essential staff." The guards complied, closing the heavy mahogany doors behind them. Outside, whispers turned to panic. No one knew what was happening inside that room, but everyone understood that something irreversible might have begun. Moments later, the doors swung open again. Queen Camilla appeared, her hair disheveled, eyes red from tears. She rushed past the guards and grabbed Dr. Latham's arm. "Tell me he's going to be all right," she demanded. "We're doing everything we can, Your Majesty," he replied. Then, as she looked around and saw the frightened faces of the staff, her tone shifted, cold, commanding, desperate to maintain control. "No one?" she said through clenched teeth. "No one says a word about this. Not a single soul. I will not have another Black August like 1997. Do you hear me?" The room fell silent. Everyone knew exactly what she meant. The summer when the world lost Princess Diana and the monarchy nearly crumbled under public outrage. The comparison was chilling. Security officials quickly sealed off the entire West Wing. Communication lines were restricted. Phones were confiscated. Every staff member was ordered to stay where they were until further notice. Outside the palace gates, however, reporters had already sensed that something was wrong. The glow of camera flashes began to appear along the fences as journalists gathered in the fog, waiting for a statement that would not come. Inside, the palace felt suffocating. Every tick of the clock seemed louder than the last. A palace attendant, young and visibly shaken, whispered to a colleague. He looked peaceful, but pale, too pale. The colleague only nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Latham stood over the king, adjusting the monitors and whispering instructions to the nurses. He knew that in a matter of hours, the entire world would demand answers. But at that moment, the only thing that mattered was keeping the king alive. Down the corridor, Camilla paced back and forth, whispering to herself. He worked too hard. I told him to rest. Why didn't he listen? Her words were trembling, part grief, part anger, but mostly fear. She turned sharply to one of the aides. Lock the press room. No statements until I approve every word. Yes, Your Majesty. The air inside Buckingham Palace that night was thick with tension. Not just fear of loss, but fear of exposure. Every face seemed to carry the same unspoken question. What really caused this? A senior aide, standing quietly near the window, murmured almost to himself. His Majesty was reading something before he collapsed. A government file, confidential. Camilla froze. What kind of file? But the aide didn't answer. He simply looked down, as if realizing he had already said too much. Outside, sirens echoed faintly through the London night. The palace remained sealed, its windows darkened, and as the clock struck midnight, the heart of the British monarchy seemed to stop with it. Yet the true storm was only beginning. Because in the hours that followed, people who had been silent for years, palace workers, former aides, even members of the inner circle began to talk. Whispered stories about the king's health, his fears, and the mysterious report he read before collapsing started to surface. And in that darkness, where truth and secrecy blurred into one, a single question began to haunt everyone who served under the crown. What happened inside that study? And what was the king trying to tell the world before he fell? It hadn't started that night in October. The warning signs had been there for months, quiet, almost invisible, until it was too late to ignore. Back in August 2025, the king's appearance began to change. During a state visit to Edinburgh, cameras captured him coughing repeatedly during the national anthem. A few weeks later, at a military ceremony in Windsor, his right hand trembled as he tried to pin a medal on a soldier's uniform. The television broadcast quickly cut away, but the moment didn't go unnoticed. At the time, palace officials dismissed it as exhaustion from a busy royal schedule, but behind closed doors, there was growing concern. One palace insider later revealed he kept a small silver case in his pocket, medicine. He'd take the pills when no one was looking. The king's private physician, Dr. Michael Latham, had already warned him to slow down. You need rest, sir, he had said quietly one afternoon after a long ceremony. Your blood pressure is unstable, and the fatigue, it's not something to ignore. Charles simply smiled, adjusted his cufflinks, and replied in that steady, resolute voice of his. The people need to see that I'm strong. Michael, they don't need a weak king sitting on the throne. That line, they don't need a weak king, would echo painfully in the weeks that followed. Queen Camilla, increasingly alarmed, tried several times to intervene. She canceled dinners, shortened tours, even asked for certain public appearances to be postponed. Each time, Charles refused. You can't keep pretending you're invincible, she snapped one evening inside Clarence's house. It's not pretense, Charles answered calmly. It's duty. He turned away before she could reply, leaving her standing in silence, torn between love and anger. But the truth was, duty wasn't the only thing weighing on him. Tensions inside the royal family were at their peak. Sources close to the palace spoke of friction between Prince William and Queen Camilla. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. William, fiercely protective of his mother's legacy, had never fully accepted Camilla's influence over his father. Their disagreements, once private, began to spill into official discussions. There were whispers that during a private council in early September, Charles had to raise his voice, something he rarely did. Enough, the king had reportedly said, his tone sharp. This family cannot keep tearing itself apart. But even as he tried to hold the monarchy together, his own health was crumbling. Dr. Latham later confided to a close colleague, he pushed himself too hard. Every day was a performance, a battle between his image and his body. By mid-September, palace aides noticed subtle changes. The king often paused to catch his breath Between meetings, his handwriting, once elegant and steady, began to shake, yet he continued to sign documents, deliver speeches, and greet crowds with that same reassuring smile. During a charity event in Cardiff, he leaned heavily on his cane, but when a reporter asked if he was feeling well, he chuckled and said, "Perfectly fine, thank you. Just getting old, I suppose." Those who knew him best saw the lie in his eyes. Camilla, desperate, tried one last time. Late one night, she stood by his desk, voice trembling. "Charles, please, and you're not proving strength, you're gambling with your life." He looked up from the papers and sighed, his eyes weary but proud. "If the people stop believing in the crown, then everything we've built, everything my mother stood for, collapses. I can't allow that." Camilla whispered, "And what happens when you collapse?" He said nothing, just lowered his gaze, as if the question itself hurt more than any illness could. Outside the palace, the press began to speculate again. Fatigue became the official explanation for every canceled event. But those inside Buckingham Palace knew better. The king's health was slipping, and no one dared to admit it. By early October, Charles's doctors increased his medication. His aides noticed he often forgot small details, the names of diplomats, the order of briefings, and yet he insisted on attending every engagement on his calendar. Dr. Latham warned Camilla privately, "He won't stop until something forces him to." Those words would prove prophetic, because only 10 days later, that something came, a late-night collapse inside the royal study that would plunge the entire country into shock. And as the king's strength faded, so too did the fragile unity of the royal household. Old loyalties began to crack. Whispered doubts turned into open mistrust. For when a crown begins to falter, even the hands meant to protect it start to tremble. And as his health declined, the trust within the royal family began to fracture. When Prince William rushed back to London, the mood inside Buckingham Palace was already suffocating. Rumors of the king's deteriorating condition had spread faster than the palace could control, and by the time William arrived, the tension between him and Queen Camilla had reached its breaking point. He didn't wait for formalities. "I need to see my father's doctor," William demanded, his voice firm, his eyes unwavering. Camilla, standing by the drawing room fireplace, didn't flinch. "This is a private matter between me and Charles," she snapped. "You have no right to interfere." The air froze. Everyone in the room knew this was more than a disagreement about medical privacy. It was a collision between two worlds, one defined by blood, the other by power. William took a slow step forward. "I'm not a bystander watching my father fade away," he said coldly. "I'm his son, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect him, even from you." Behind the heavy velvet curtains, the palace clock struck noon, but time seemed to stop. Servants pretended not to hear. Guards averted their eyes, and even the portraits of past monarchs seemed to watch in silent judgment. Princess Anne entered, her presence a brief flicker of calm amid the chaos. She had always been the family's anchor, the voice of reason when tempers ran hot. "Enough," she said, stepping between them. "This isn't helping Charles. If we keep tearing each other apart, by the time he wakes up, he won't even recognize his own family." Her words hung in the air like the echo of a prophecy, but neither William nor Camilla yielded. To William, this was about truth, about the growing suspicion that his stepmother was hiding something. Ever since Charles's health began to decline, Camilla had tightened her control over who could see him, what was said to the press, even which doctors were allowed near him. To William, it felt like a wall being built between father and son. To Camilla, it was about survival. She had spent decades fighting for legitimacy, clawing her way from the shadows of scandal to the throne beside the man she loved. She wasn't about to let anyone, least of all Diana's son, strip that away. And so, the battle lines were drawn, right in the heart of Buckingham Palace. Anne tried again, her voice trembling with frustration. "We're supposed to be a family," she said. "But right now, we look like enemies fighting over a kingdom that's slipping through our fingers." William turned away, his jaw tightening. "Family?" he murmured. "That word doesn't mean much anymore, does it?" Camilla shot him a sharp look but said nothing. For a brief moment, even she seemed shaken by how far things had gone. Outside the palace gates, the world waited in silence. Reporters camped along the mall, their cameras ready, their microphones trembling in the wind. Across Britain, television screens flickered with breaking news alerts, and the public held its breath. The king's doctors remained silent. The palace offered no statements. And behind those ancient stone walls, the future of the monarchy hung by a thread, caught between a son's desperation and a queen's defiance. Every whisper, every closed-door meeting, every look exchanged in those halls carried weight. Staff members spoke in hushed tones about shouting matches behind locked doors, about Anne leaving in tears after another failed attempt to mediate. It was said that one night, William stood outside his father's private chamber for nearly an hour, waiting to be allowed in while Camilla refused to grant him access. When he finally entered, Charles was asleep, his breathing shallow. William sat beside him in silence, realizing for the first time how fragile everything truly was, not just his father's health, but the unity of the royal family itself. Anne's warning echoed in his mind. If we keep going like this, when Charles wakes up, he won't recognize us anymore. And as the palace lights dimmed, a chilling truth began to sink in. The real battle wasn't just for the throne or the crown, it was for what little remained of the family behind it. By dawn, London felt colder than usual. The air outside Buckingham Palace carried a strange heaviness, the kind that comes when a nation senses something is terribly wrong but no one dares to say it out loud. Within hours, the hashtag Pray for the King flooded every corner of the internet. TikTok clips, X posts, and YouTube live streams showed people gathering by the palace gates, candles trembling in the October wind. Someone whispered that they had seen the curtains in the king's private quarters drawn tight since midnight. Someone else claimed to hear the sound of weeping from the upper floor. But from the palace itself, nothing. The BBC aired carefully worded updates, repeating the same line. His Majesty remains under medical supervision. Yet the silence between those words grew louder with every hour. Comment sections filled with accusations. Why aren't they telling us the truth? Is he already gone? Where's William? Why hasn't he spoken? One of the network's own correspondents, off camera, told a colleague, they've been ordered to hold back. It's not just about health, it's about control. By evening, the tension had turned into fury. Across Britain, newspapers tried to confirm leaks from palace insiders, but calls went unanswered. The royal press office shut down communication completely. One journalist described it as a digital blackout in the heart of monarchy. An anonymous former advisor speaking to The Guardian confessed, "The palace is hiding how serious it is. They're afraid of the panic it would cause if the king can no longer reign. Camilla is already making quiet arrangements. She's preparing for a temporary regency." The statement, once published, exploded like wildfire. For the first time, the public's sympathy began to fracture into suspicion. Did the queen consort already know more than she was admitting? In a pub near Hyde Park, two men debated over their pints. "Mate, this is the same pattern as Diana," one said bitterly. Silence, denial, and then disaster. His friend nodded, staring at the muted TV showing endless footage of palace gates. "We trusted them once. I'm not sure we should again." Outside the palace, a woman in her 60s held up a framed photo of Charles from his coronation day. Reporters surrounded her as she fought back tears. "We lost Diana because they stayed silent," she said. "Oh, please, don't let history repeat itself." Her words spread online within minutes, shared thousands of times, echoing a fear that no one dared name directly. The monarchy was on the edge of another tragedy, and this time, silence might be its undoing. Behind the palace walls, that silence was anything but calm. Courtiers whispered in corridors. Guards exchanged anxious glances. Rumors swirled that William had been locked in a heated meeting with senior advisors, demanding transparency. Camilla, meanwhile, had reportedly isolated herself in the king's private chambers, refusing to answer calls. Even seasoned royal commentators were baffled. One wrote, "I've covered the monarchy for 30 years, but never have I seen them so quiet, so paralyzed by fear." And yet, in every city across the UK, from Manchester to Edinburgh, people gathered for vigils, lighting candles and singing softly into the cold night. It wasn't just grief they felt, it was betrayal. By the second night, protests began forming outside the BBC headquarters. The crowd chanted, "Tell us the truth. We deserve to know." In response, police cordoned off the area around Buckingham Palace, citing security concerns. Helicopters circled overhead. For the first time since the Queen's passing, London felt like a city holding its breath. Inside the palace, the corridors that once echoed with ceremony now carried only whispers. An attendant was overheard muttering, "They're waiting for the right moment." But what if that moment never comes? At 11:52 p.m., the Royal Press Office issued one final cryptic statement. "There will be an official update regarding His Majesty's condition in due course. The family appreciates the nation's understanding and prayers." No time, no date, no reassurance. As the world refreshed their screens, waiting for a sign of life or loss, the clock in the palace tower struck midnight. The crowd outside fell silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. And then, as if echoing through the very heart of the kingdom, came the line that would define this night forever. "We lost Diana because they stayed silent. Please don't let history repeat itself." The morning light over Buckingham Palace was pale and unforgiving. Reporters lined up outside the black gates, their breath visible in the October chill. For 2 days, Britain had waited in silence. And now, finally, the palace was ready to speak. At precisely 9 o'clock a.m., the royal press secretary stepped up to the podium. Cameras clicked in rapid succession, their mechanical rhythm echoing the tension in the air. He unfolded a piece of paper, his voice trembling slightly as he read, "His Majesty's health condition requires extended recovery. All public duties are suspended indefinitely." A murmur swept through the crowd. No details, no medical explanation, no assurance, just an open-ended uncertainty. The words "suspended indefinitely" hit like a thunderclap. Moments later, Queen Camilla appeared. Her pearl brooch gleamed faintly under the harsh lights, a fragile symbol of composure she could barely hold. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the microphone. For a second, she closed her eyes as though to gather the last of her strength. "The king needs time," she said softly, her voice breaking on the word king. "And we need your prayers." Her expression was tender but distant, like someone speaking from the edge of despair. When she turned to leave, the cameras caught it. The flicker in her eyes, that flash of fear I couldn't quite hide. It wasn't just grief, it was something else. In the next hour, news outlets across the country broke into special coverage. The BBC's anchor spoke in a hushed tone, calling it a moment of national reflection. But not everyone agreed. Social media erupted with disbelief. Extended recovery? That's just code for something worse. Why is Camilla speaking instead of the Prime Minister? Where's Prince William? They didn't have to wait long. By noon, Prince William appeared in front of Kensington Palace, wearing a dark suit and an expression carved from stone. Standing behind a row of microphones, he spoke slowly, deliberately. "My father's health remains our family's priority. Until he recovers, I will temporarily undertake His Majesty's duties." The words landed with weight and finality. It was a statement that sounded both respectful and quietly revolutionary. For the first time, the heir to the throne had publicly stepped into his father's place. Inside the palace, whispers spread like wildfire. Courtiers exchanged nervous looks. Some said Camilla had been blindsided by William's announcement. Others insisted she had expected it and feared it all along. That afternoon, the Times ran the headline, "A Kingdom in Transition." Meanwhile, The Daily Mirror asked bluntly, who rules now, Camilla or William? The public, too, split in two. Supporters of William saw him as the steady hand Britain needed, a son protecting both crown and country. Others pitied Camilla, painting her as a woman isolated in grief, overshadowed by the family that never truly accepted her. Royal experts filled the airwaves, dissecting every gesture, every phrase. This isn't just about health, one analyst said on Sky News. This is about power. And yet, amid the noise, there was still that haunting silence from Buckingham itself. No photos of the king, no video message, no reassurance, only curtains drawn tight behind the palace windows. Outside, crowds gathered with flowers and candles once more. A little girl placed a note against the iron gate. It read simply, "Get well soon, Your Majesty." But the grown-ups nearby exchanged a different look, one that said they weren't sure there would be a recovery at all. As dusk fell over London, a single phrase began to circulate online, repeated in headlines and whispered in pubs. Who truly rules Buckingham Palace now? It began with a whisper inside the palace walls, one that spread quietly but struck like lightning once it reached the right ears. A senior aide, speaking under strict anonymity, revealed that the king had left behind a handwritten letter to his sister, Princess Anne, only hours before collapsing in his private study. The letter, sealed with the royal crest, carried words that chilled her to the bone. If I do not wake, guard the honor of our name. Do not let anyone turn the crown into a bargain. Those final lines, simple yet damning, hinted at what Charles had feared most. Not death, but betrayal. Anne read the letter over and over again, her hands trembling, her mind racing. The implications were impossible to ignore. Rumors had already circled for weeks about Camilla's growing influence behind closed doors. Some whispered that she had urged an accelerated transition plan, an arrangement that would quietly shift decision-making power into her hands under the guise of temporary regency. Anne could no longer stay silent. That evening, she requested a private audience with Camilla in the Queen's drawing room, a chamber so still that even the ticking clock seemed hesitant to break the silence. Camilla entered, dressed impeccably as always, her face calm, but her eyes watchful. Anne stood by the window, the king's letter folded neatly in her hand. Anne, do you love him or the crown he wears? Camilla pauses, voice steady but sharp. I love the man you never understood. Anne, then prove it. Stop treating this family like your stage. Camilla, coldly, and what would you have me do? Watch everything he built crumble while you hide behind tradition? The two women stared at each other, the air between them heavy with decades of resentment. Anne saw in Camilla not just a rival, but the symbol of everything that had fractured her brother's life. Camilla, in turn, saw judgment, harsh, royal, eternal. When the meeting ended, no one spoke of it, but those nearby could feel the frost that followed. Servants whispered of doors closing harder than usual, of voices rising in hallways that were supposed to stay quiet. The palace, usually so meticulously ordered, now felt haunted by secrets that refused to stay buried. Anne returned to her quarters that night and placed the king's letter in a locked drawer. She stared at it for a long moment before whispering under her breath, I won't let them destroy you. Outside, the bells of Westminster tolled faintly through the peace, echoing across London like a warning. And within that silence, behind those gilded doors, a decision was being prepared. One that would not only determine the future of the monarchy, but reveal who was truly willing to protect the crown at any cost. Buckingham Palace has remained silent. No new statements, no reassuring words. Only the cold stone walls stand, guarding a truth no one dares to speak. Prince William was seen arriving quietly at a private hospital, his face pale, his eyes heavy with a weight only he can understand. He said nothing to the press. Camilla, meanwhile, has vanished from the public eye, reportedly retreating to her estate in Wiltshire. Princess Anne was the only one who stepped forward, her voice steady, but her eyes glistening as she said softly, I can only say one thing. His Majesty is still fighting. Across Britain, a familiar chill swept through the nation. Many compared this moment to that dark summer of '97, when the country lost Diana and something inside the nation broke forever. And now, and as the lights inside Buckingham flicker against the London night, it feels as though something else is crumbling. Not the crown itself, but the faith of millions who once believed it was unshakable. And if King Charles never returns, is Britain truly ready for a new king named William?